As someone who's been a night owl all their life, I can't even begin to remember all of the stereotypes and judgment that have been thrown my way simply for liking to be awake at night. And on top of that, I've seen a recent surge in content that kind of perpetuates the notion that morning people are inherently better, and I'm tired of it. If you look at this recent trend of content creators trying to wake up at 5 a.m. every day for a week because it's supposedly the most productive thing to do, or the aesthetic lifestyle vloggers who actually get up very early every morning and make us believe that we're all supposed to be cooking ourselves up a breakfast buffet, doing yoga, journaling, cleaning our skyscraper New York apartment, all before the hour of 9 a.m. Then it's clear to see that being a morning person is something that's highly praised in our society and has been for some time. Well, let me tell you, I'm fed up with this whole idea, and that's why I've decided to make this video. Since I've recently graduated from university as an industrial psychologist and therefore am very invested in human behavior in a more professional or productive context, I thought it would be a very fun idea to kind of do some research about what science has to say about morning people and evening people, and explain my thoughts alongside what I find. So if you have ever been unfairly called lazy just for being a night owl, then keep on watching. Now, it's no secret that this world mostly caters to morning people. Think of school hours, the standard 9 to 5 job, stores mostly only being open during the day. There are obviously a lot of very valid arguments as to why this has become our standard. Economically and practically, it always just made sense to plan your day according to when there was light outside, especially before the invention of electricity. And mostly for specific industries such as the agricultural industry, they really needed and still need daylight to function, right? And even now that we do have electricity, it's still just much cheaper and easier to live alongside the daylight. In most parts of the world, you don't necessarily have to turn your lights on during the office hours while at work, or you don't even have to use your heating, or not as much during the day because usually it cools down at night, but during the day it's always a little bit hotter, so that also saves you some money. You get where I'm going, right? It's also easier as a community, as a society, for everyone to kind of have the same rhythm and to plan everything according to that. Kind of like synchronizing everything and everyone. Taking all that into account, I understand why the world has evolved the way that it has, but easier and cheaper isn't always better, especially now that we have access to electricity and other utilities and so much scientific research. Now, if you're wondering why I'm so passionate about this topic that I wanted to make a whole video about it, I'll give you some backstory. Because I'm also sure that many of my fellow night owls will be able to relate to my experiences, and if you can, let me know in the comments, please. As a younger child, similar to most other children, I had a normal sleeping schedule, a healthy sleeping schedule, whatever that means, right? I just followed what was conventional because that's also what my parents enforced on me, obviously. However, when I went to high school and I started going through puberty, that's kind of when my preferences started to change. I started realizing that I preferred being awake at night and that I also felt more productive later in the evening, later in the day, whatever, that I felt like I got this sort of energy boost that I didn't have in the morning. Obviously, during high school, I still had school during the week and I was always a very studious person, so I did maintain that healthy sleeping schedule throughout my entire high school education. And to be honest, I never really struggled with going to bed on time or waking up early. It kind of just became a habit, and I always made sure that I got all of my hours in, that I went to bed early enough so that my mind would be, functioning the best it could because I wanted to get good grades, and I did. So, hey, clearly something worked. But as I was saying, even though I had a healthy sleeping schedule, I woke up early enough, I went to bed early enough, I had enough hours of sleep, I still didn't feel energized in the morning. I still always felt like I had my peak right after lunch or even later in the day. Anyway, I upheld my 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. sleep schedule throughout my entire high school career, but when it was the weekend or when we had a longer break, that's when it was my time to shine. I would often stay up to 2 to 3 a.m., sometimes even 4 or 5 a.m. Especially during those longer school breaks, such as the summer holiday, my rhythm would kind of shift. I would still only sleep 7 or 8 hours per night, but I would just go to bed later and wake up later. And back then I mostly stayed up late because it was fun and it was cozy and it felt a little wild and it just felt right for me. But I wasn't necessarily doing anything productive. I was probably just on Omegle. The whole being productive at night aspect kind of only came into play when I went to university. And when I went to university, I obviously also had morning classes, and I once again tried to kind of conform to the normal sleeping rhythms, and I went to those classes. But then I kind of started realizing that those classes weren't mandatory and that I was just as able to kind of get good grades by myself by either watching the recorded classes afterwards or just teaching myself from our textbooks and the slides, depending on what course and how the professor taught the class, I kind of could see what I could get away with. And I just kind of stopped going to those morning classes because I realized that even if I did go to those classes with sufficient hours of sleep, well rested, I still didn't feel like I got anything out of it because I didn't feel productive in the morning. I didn't feel alert. I didn't feel like I could focus. I didn't feel like I was actually being productive, like I was contributing anything to myself or to the class or to classmates, whatever. And it always just ended up feeling like a waste of time because not only did I end up waking up early, but I also ended up going to a class, spending 3 hours there and not feeling like I learned anything or retained anything or contributed anything. I was obviously very lucky that I was able to be a night owl during university, because obviously during high school this was not possible because I had to be at school every day. But during uni it was actually quite rare for me to have to attend morning activities. This was partly due to the fact that half of my university education happened during COVID lockdown, where most of our classes were either pre-recorded or a live stream, and also partly due to the fact that our university offered us a lot of freedom in deciding when you would attend those mandatory classes or practical sessions or whatever. They would just kind of offer us time slots for certain groups to pick, and I would just always pick the ones that were at a later hour. As I said, it was during uni that I was able to utilize being a night owl for productive reasons. I would usually experience this boost in energy at around 8 p.m. and that's when I would kind of start doing my coursework or start studying, prepare presentations. I was also lucky enough to live with my best friend during most of my years at uni, and she kind of had a similar sleeping schedule as me, probably partly because of me. But yeah, it was always just really fun that we were kind of doing productive stuff at the same time together. That was obviously very fun and motivating, and to me, most of the times it didn't even feel like an assignment or a chore because I actually enjoyed being able to utilize that energy boost to work on something that was necessary for me, that I see it as a blessing that I got to be educated. I see it as a blessing that I got to attend university. And whenever I felt like I actually had energy, I always enjoyed doing my tasks. It just generally felt like I was listening to what felt right for me, my body, my mind, and I felt at peace. I felt like very at peace. I was working alongside my rhythm and not against it. I do have to say that the few instances where I had to wake up early for a mandatory class, or even worse, an exam, were difficult. Especially when I had early exams, I would be a mess. When I had exams at noon or in the afternoon, I would obviously also still be stressed, but I could always sleep. But when I had exams in the morning, I could not get a single minute of sleep, and I would just go to my exam having been awake for 30 plus hours. And I would still have to perform, I would still have to do my best. I remember this one instance where once again I hadn't slept and I went to my exam. There was this question that I had reread over and over again, and I couldn't understand what they were asking me, because every time I kept reading pirate in this sentence, and this was like an HR course, and I could not remember for the life of me where we had ever seen anything about pirates. And I kept rereading it and I just could not figure it out. I was like, there has to be something wrong. Like, this has to be an error of theirs. Like, I don't understand. And I kid you not, I think it took me 10 minutes to figure out that it did not in fact say pirate, it said private. Yes, and that's when everything started to make sense again. But anyway, when I went to morning exams, stuff like that would happen. Like, I would just kind of be loopy, be kind of out of it. I would also be physically ill. Like, my intestines would be raging against me. And I just feel like I had to get my exam over as quick as possible and go back home and get sleep, because that's the only time when I got sleep is when the exam was over with. Safe to say, I did perform much worse on my morning exams when compared to my other ones. Sometimes it would feel so unfair, because even if I fixed my sleeping rhythm 2 weeks prior, I would still not be able to get a single minute of sleep for a morning exam. And like, in some ways to me, it felt like morning people had an unfair advantage, because all of our most difficult exams were always morning exams. Another instance where I always felt unfairly targeted. I'm pretending to be a victim here, I'm really not, but I'm just adding some dramatics into this, okay? Please don't be mad at me. Anyway, another instance where I felt targeted, as I said, was when we'd have group assignments. During our free hours, we'd obviously sometimes have to plan get-togethers to work on our project or presentation or whatever. And there were many instances where all of the other group members would propose to meet up at ungodly hours. And then socially anxious me would gather up all of my bravery, all of my courage, to ask if maybe it was possible to meet at a slightly later hour, to then have everyone kind of ganging up against me and making me out to be this very lazy and difficult person, when I know I wasn't. I know damn well that I always pulled my weight, and when I was in a group with people that didn't, I would do extra work and never ask for any extra credit or any appreciation. It's never been about that. And obviously I understand that it's often a democracy, and if everyone wants to meet up at an early hour and then I'm the only one that doesn't, I'm expected to conform. But I've just noticed so many times that it's always the night owls that have to conform and not the morning people, because the world is built for morning people. And when I did ask to meet up at a later time, it's not like I was asking them to meet up at 8 p.m. It would be like 10 or 11 a.m. instead of 7. I would then conform and stop being difficult and just meet up at the hour that they wanted to meet up, and I would just not feel like I was able to contribute as effectively as I could have later in the day, which I think is a shame and a waste of resources, but hey. Then during my last month of university, I had to complete a 6-month long internship where I basically worked a 9-to-5 job full-time for 6 months unpaid. And I once again had to maintain a normal sleeping schedule. I once again didn't have any issues with that, but I still just didn't feel productive in the morning, even with enough hours of sleep. I would still only feel more energized and more productive after lunch. And I just want to mention that I did eat breakfast, so it's not like I was starving myself until lunch, and that's the reason for my boost in energy, because I can already smell the comments. Anyway, this entire backstory is a very long-winded way of me saying that even though I am perfectly capable of conforming to the normal, healthy sleeping schedule, but even if I do that, I still don't feel as productive as I do in the evening, and that conforming to those hours is not what works best for my productivity. My personal experience and some of the classes that I've had on circadian rhythm during university got me very interested in this topic, and I also know that it's a very popular research topic, and I run into certain studies here and there that kind of confirm what I think or feel, but just running across studies here and there doesn't really give you a full view of what's actually going on, so I did some research. If we go back in time and look at some of the earlier studies on this topic, I would say like pre-2000s, then we would see that those studies kind of introduce eveningness and morningness as terms, and they also introduced a self-report questionnaire alongside it that can help you determine if you're an evening or morning person. However, many of those earlier studies are very negative, and they kind of perpetuate this idea that being a night owl is a choice someone makes, and they also kind of link it to very negative concepts such as being a night owl leading to higher rates of depression and similar negative things. This obviously led to the persisting stereotype that people who prefer to be awake later in the evening or later at night are lazy, unhealthy, depressed, unhappy. While it is true that many people who experience depression are also night owls, that doesn't mean that every night owl is therefore depressed. Many of those earlier studies only show correlations and not causality, meaning that yes, there is a link, but not necessarily a direct one. There are many different possible explanations as to why being a night owl and having depressive symptoms are tied to each other in some way, and there can be many other variables that play a part in that relationship. And these other variables are often called confounders for a reason. These confounders, these kind of like hidden variables, often become a topic of new research. For example, some studies highlight the effects of shift work and of varying sleep cycles in general, and they state that it's not necessarily being a night owl that's a problem, it's the fact that shift work and varying sleep cycles can actually cause those depressive symptoms or unhappiness or whatever. Because obviously our body is a system just like any other, and systems prefer homeostasis. So if you're a shift worker who goes to bed at 6 a.m. one day and who goes to bed at 8 p.m. the other day, it's very confusing for your body, and your body doesn't like that. It's the same thing as if you were constantly not eating for 3 weeks and then eating for one day. Your body would store all of the fat from that food because it doesn't know when it's going to get fed next, right? But what I think is the most important and more conclusive finding in relevant current research is that being a night owl or a morning person is actually based on your genetics. Meaning that at least part of the reason as to why people are morning people or night owls can be explained by your genetics. This was actually found by a huge genetic study which was performed by the Saxena Lab, which is tied to Harvard through the Harvard Medical School and the Massachusetts General Hospital. They performed a study analyzing the genes of about 700,000 people, which is a huge sample. And they found 351 genetic variants that were able to kind of explain the differences in chronotype of circadian rhythms between people. This study did still find some negative consequences of being a night owl, where they kind of said that being a night owl leads to lower well-being, which in its turn can cause more depressive symptoms or lead to a higher risk of schizophrenia throughout someone's life. However, they suggested that this could be explained by something called social jet lag, which is basically when people who are genetically night owls are always expected to conform to morning people rhythms. And because of this having to fight against their normal rhythms, they sometimes don't get enough sleep, or they're just not happy with having to wake up all the time, which, leads to lower happiness, right? Despite the study not being able to offer all the answers, I think it's a huge win to kind of once again verify this genetic component, and that it's not as simple as just telling night owls that they're choosing to be night owls and they should just fix their rhythm. This field of research is still very controversial, and there's still many more studies being performed every day. There's this recent study that claims that the cognitive function of night owls is actually superior to that of morning people. And again, these are just found correlations between cognitive function and circadian rhythms and not necessarily causality. This study also states that irregardless of all other variables, that getting enough sleep is still one of the most important factors, and you should always aim to get between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. At the same time, there are also still prominent studies that contradict that night owls should follow their natural rhythms, such as the Stanford one, but this one does not actually account for that social jet lag theory that I mentioned earlier. As you can tell, it's still a very controversial research topic and there are many opposing opinions, but I still think the most important takeaway from all of this is that there is in fact a genetic component. And that in itself should be enough reasons to look at our current policies and habits. Many organizations have already started to cater to people's natural rhythms and preferences by offering them flexibility in their work hours, whether that's within a specific window, such as is often the case here in Belgium. We call that gliding hours. I don't know if that's the same translation in English, but that's what we call it, where employees can start their day somewhere between, let's say, 7 to 10 a.m. and stop their day at anywhere between like 3 to 7 p.m. I don't know what the actual time slots are. It's different for every company, but you get the idea. While some companies actually offer their employees complete freedom in picking their hours as long as they get their work done, and this way the employees can kind of cater their workloads to their productive cycles. This has recently been referred to as chrono working, which is a new term. In some Scandinavian countries, they've recently made a change to switch to a 4-day work week instead of a 5-day work week, which also gives more work-life balance to their employees and offers them an extra free day, which obviously can also help you cater to your natural rhythm. So there's clearly some good progress being made worldwide, but the 9-to-5 job is still seen as the golden standard. And I'm well aware that changing habits isn't easy or cheap, but even if you as a company owner do not care about your employees, you do not see them as humans, just as capital, even then, you can benefit from giving your employees more freedom. I believe that giving employees more agency and freedom will lead to more satisfied employees, which will lead to higher morale, less turnover, more productivity, all of that. And even if we widen this discussion outside of your place of work, I think not enforcing the 9-to-5 could be good for the entire society. Just think of fixing the rush hour problem, where not everyone is driving home from work at the exact same hour. Wouldn't that be great? So why not give it a go? And I don't know why I'm acting like I'm selling you all a product. I'm not, but hey, sales. Now, if you're watching this and you're a night owl yourself, let me know what you think would be some good solutions for night owls in favor of society, in favor of their productivity at work. And if you're a morning person who likes to make night owls feel bad about themselves, check yourself. I've left some links in the description of this video of some of the articles and the studies that I mentioned, so if you're interested in those, you can go check those out. And if not, then you don't have to. I hope you enjoyed this little deep dive rant thing. I don't really know what to classify this video as, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. And I hope to see you again soon in a future video. Bye!